So again, just to reflect upon our mission, to gather in the Word, be transformed by that Word so that we can share the Word of Christ with others. So tonight, we're going to have an episode of Hell's Kitchen. I'm a big foodie, so I do the Gordon Ramsay thing all the time and everything. So you're wondering, what are we talking about? Well, we're going to be talking about food. A whole bunch. Verse 8 leads us into it. So just a running start. Last week we talked about how Daniel had been moved out of Jerusalem, out of the southern kingdom, because Babylon began its conquest of the Holy Land. And this would have been around 605 BC. And Daniel would have been in the first wave of exiles that were taken out. And we're told that he and other youth that were either royalty or nobility, he must have been nobility, he doesn't have royalty in his blood, but they selected good-looking, intelligent leaders of the Jewish people to be brought into the king's court, basically to deprogram them of their Jewish background and program them into what it means to be a good Babylonian citizen and leader. So in my mind, it's a little Mao Zedong action, trying to get rid of the old way of thinking and bringing in a new way of thinking. And so they were also given new names. And we talked about last week how Daniel, we still know him by his Hebrew name, but his three friends, we know them by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And those names reflect a movement from their loyalty to Yahweh to a naming, hopefully, that they would transition into adherence to Babylonian gods, which, of course, we know they didn't do, but they kept those names, which I found kind of fascinating, and don't really have an answer as to why we know Daniel by Daniel and the other three by their Babylonian names, but we do. So verse 8 follows this whole narrative, and Daniel kind of digs his heels in. And for us, we might go, well, this is an interesting thing to dig your heels in on. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food. They were brought into the king's court. They got to eat from the king's cafeteria with the king's cook. Things had to be good, right? But Daniel says, I'm not going to defile myself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. So the chief of the eunuchs, I think I can't remember what his name is, we talked about him last week. He's kind of the one in charge of the training program for all of these immigrants being brought in. Exiles being deported in, totally different concept. So Daniel is saying, I'm not going to eat the king's food, okay? Now, how do you think the king's going to feel about that? Probably not happy, right? If you're in a deprogramming and you're being programmed, they want you to follow along what's going on. But Daniel asks not to do this. So as a Protestant Christian, my reaction to that is, what's the big deal, right? For me, I'm being totally transparent and honest. What's the big deal? Why is this a thing for Daniel? So you thought you went down a big rabbit hole last week. This one's even bigger. Last week we looked at accoutrements that they might have taken from the temple. Now we're going to look at dietary codes and why those might be important, more important to Daniel than they would be to us today. So this is from the Evangelical Commentary. The issue of food and drink is highly significant to Daniel and his friends. The Lord had clearly designated certain foods as unclean. So this Leviticus passages here, we're going to take a look at those. Moreover, the royal court was closely associated with pagan temples, as food and drink were symbolically dedicated to the gods. Daniel humbly asked for permission not to eat the royal diet. Now, this issue of food being dedicated to the gods and then eaten is something that is in pagan tradition all the way up to Paul. I mean, early Christians were having similar issues going, a lot of them coming out of paganism going, wait, I know how all this works, and I don't know if I should be doing this or not, okay? And Paul, I kind of like Paul's answer. Paul was like, I know all these idols are meaningless, so who gives a whoop-de-doo whether you eat the food or not? But if it really causes you problems, probably shouldn't eat the food, okay? I mean, that's kind of where he landed on the whole thing. So, big picture overview. A lot of other faiths also have dietary codes built in to their religious life, okay? So here's kind of a chart, and we'll look at this closer. So food restrictions in Judaism: eat only animals with cloven hooves, split hooves, which chew the cud. For example, cattle, sheep, goats, deer. Only eat the forequarters of the animal. Don't eat the hind end part, evidently. Eat only fish with scales or fins. So that would eliminate like shellfish and eels, stuff like that. Snails, they probably see. And no blood. So the blood is to be drained out of the animal before you cook it. In Islam, no blood, no pork, no intoxicating liquor. So it sounds a lot like Judaism, except for the intoxicating liquor. The Jews evidently don't have a problem with that, except you shouldn't get drunk, but wine's okay, as long as it's a Jew making your wine. Sikhism, no beef. Hinduism must not kill or eat any animal. I didn't realize that one, and that one sounds off to me, but I could be wrong. Days of the year. In Christianity, no meat on Fridays during Lent in Roman Catholicism. Did you know that? Just checking to see if you're awake. Okay. Unless it's St. Patrick's Day. An exception granted. Hey? Okay. I think of one of my favorite jokes, but I'm not going to go there. Fast on Wednesday and Friday in the Greek Orthodox Church. Didn't realize that. Judaism, no food preparation on the Sabbath. I remember my mom got a new stove, and it had Sabbath settings on it. And we were like, what in the world is a Sabbath? Well, it's you set it, and it doesn't go, it doesn't start, it starts cooking when Sabbath hits. So you're not working, you did all your work before Sabbath, so the oven knows to kick in and cook your food so that, you don't really have to do the work of turning the dial or pushing the button or whatever. Yeah.
Someone told me there's hotels in like New York that on the Sabbath, they don't push a button. It stops on every store, on every floor.
On the floor?
Mm-hmm. So that the Jewish people don't push the button.
Don't have to actually push the button. Yeah, I see the Orthodox Jews walking to Shabbat, and I'm like, wouldn't it be less work to drive your car than, but whatever, it's different thinking. Somebody in the back had their hand up, I thought. Nope, okay. I already did that one. Islam, foods may not be eaten between sunrise and sunset during Ramadan. So there's a fasting period going on. And in Buddhism, monks do not eat after midday. Didn't know that. Judaism, there's a ritual slaughtering of animals. Animals are killed a certain way, and usually you have a rabbi whose job is for the slaughtering of animals. And so certain days, meatpacking plants will have a kosher day, and the rabbi comes in and either does the killing or watches how the killing happens to make sure that it is done appropriately. And that has a lot to do with the one slice and the blood coming out of the beast and the condition of the animal. Separate utensils for meat and dairy products. They don't mix meat and dairy, okay? And they're big on that, yeah?
I've seen various home improvement shows where the couple is Jewish and they're looking for a kosher kitchen. Do you know what that entails?
A kosher kitchen.
That's separate from, there's like basically two kitchens, a kosher and a separate.
A kosher kitchen, of course, cannot have any yeast in it, especially during Passover. The utensil thing and preparation of pots and pans. You can't cook meat in one pot and then turn around and heat your milk up in that same pot, nor can you use the same spoons. So it might be just totally keeping them separate. We've got some good friends that are Muslim, and she has a kitchen out in the garage and one inside, but I think it's mostly for spices because it's very, very odorous. And so they keep the odorousness out in the garage, and so the kitchen inside is almost like a serving kitchen more than it is really a cooking kitchen. So that'd be totally different than the whole kosher. Ritual animal slaughter. I don't know if they have imams that function like the Jewish rabbis. I'm not sure how they do that. Hinduism, ritual bathing and donning of clean clothes by Brahmins before eating. So, and there's some of that cleansing ritual in other religions as well. Fasts, Christians 40-day Great Lent fast before Easter and a 40-day Advent fast. That's in the Greek Orthodox tradition. And then Islam in the month of Ramadan, the 13th, 14th, and 15th of each month, there's fasting that happens as well. In Ramadan, it's the sunset to sunrise. So when we were in Jordan, we found a KFC in Amman, and it was like, okay, just got to do this, you know. And so we went, and I was so intrigued that I took a picture of our box that the food came in and the napkin, and the box says halal, which would be, I don't know exactly what it translates into, but it's a common word that would reflect kind of the same notion of kosher in Judaism. I don't know if it has to do with the same understanding, but it has the same connotation, kind of. But I don't know if you can see the line at the bottom. It says slaughtered as per Islamic Sharia. So the chicken was slaughtered correctly, so it is a halal chicken. And KFC is really big about making sure that they fit the halal. And the big towns in Jordan and other places, they're all over the place. It's just kind of crazy. So, Leviticus. I hope no one goes to sleep during this section, but here we go. So the Lord spoke, this is chapter 7. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the people of Israel saying, you shall eat no fat. So I've put red and green pieces in there that I think may be pertinent to what might affect Daniel and in the Babylonian setting. So eat no fat. So I'm assuming that would mean that you don't cook your meat in that fat either, which could be problematic. Of an ox or sheep or goat, The fat of an animal that dies of itself and the fat of one that's torn by beasts may be put to any other use, but on no account shall you eat it. So I don't know if you make candles with it or what you do, but you don't eat it. For every person who eats of the fat of an animal of which a food offering may be made to the Lord shall be cut off from the people. So you're basically thrown out of the community. I mean, this is serious stuff. Moreover, you shall eat no blood whatever, whether foul or of animal or any of your dwelling places. So eat no blood, and we might go, well, I don't eat blood either. How many of you have had a steak and you cut it up and that just comes running? Well, that wouldn't happen with a kosher steak. You wouldn't see blood running out. What's that? A kosher steak, as the animal is killed, all the blood is drained from the animal. And in our situation, doesn't fit our standards. When I was up in seminary in St. Paul, we went and visited a Jewish family. Our Hebrew class did, and man, it was quite the house that we were in. And the guy owned kosher meatpacking plants in Minneapolis, Sioux Falls. I can't remember where the other one was. Someplace in Iowa. And that's all they did was prepare kosher meat to be transported all over the country. And so they had a rabbi on staff who was there to take care of the meats. Yes? Yeah, Jews for Jesus. That's a great question. I would, and I could be wrong, but I would say Jews for Jesus would follow these dietary codes. I'm trying to remember if Ave Schneider and I had that conversation. We were preparing food together one night in the kitchen, which was kind of fun. I think that would be one of the differences between Jews for Jesus and like Protestant Christians, where we would go, yeah, dietary codes, not so much. They would go, yeah, it's important, but Jesus is more important. I mean, they would say that, but they still follow those. Whoever eats any blood, that person shall be cut off from his people. Again, you're separated from the people. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, speak to the people of Israel, saying, these are the living things that you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. So here we go. Whatever parts the hoof, and is cloven-footed and chews the cud, among the animals you may eat. So when I think chewing the cud, I think of a cow. I mean, a cow is always chewing the cud. Nevertheless, among those that chew the cud or part the hoof, you shall not eat these. So the camel, because it chews the cud, but does not part its hoof. So it has a solid hoof, but it chews cud like an animal or like a cow. It's unclean to you. So stop eating camels, you guys. And the rock badger, no rock badgers, it chews the cud, but it does not part the hoof. It's unclean to you. And the hare, rabbits, it chews the cud, but it doesn't part the hoof. Okay, so it doesn't have a hoof, but it chews cud. It's unclean to you. So Jews don't eat rabbits. Probably not horses either, correct. And the pig, you go, of course, I knew about the pig, right? Because it parts the hoof, so it's got a split hoof, but it's cloven-footed, but it doesn't chew the cud. Pigs just eat and swallow. They don't chew the cud. And if you think a pig chews the cud, just go out to a pig farm and watch a pig. They don't chew the cud. You just get out of the way while they're eating, right? You shall not eat any of their flesh. You shall not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. These you may eat. Of all that are in the waters, everything in the waters that has fins and scales, so any kind of fish, go for it. Whether in the seas or rivers, you may eat it. Doesn't matter where it came from, just as long as it's got scales on it. But anything in the seas or the rivers that does not have fins and scales, of the swarming creatures in the waters and of the living creatures that are in the waters, is detestable to you. So no more lobster. No more shrimps. Yeah, I'm just ruining your life, aren't I? Yep. I like all that stuff. You shall regard them as detestable. You shall not eat any of their flesh. You shall detest their carcasses. Anything in the waters that does not have fins and scales is detestable to you. In my wife's case, it's even stuff with fins and scales, right? She's back there just smiling. And these you shall detest among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are detestable. The eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon of any kind, any raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, and the hawk of any kind. I had a professor in seminary who was one of our preaching professors, and he said his goal in life was to preach on Leviticus 11:13. That was his goal in life. He said, I got to preach a sermon. So I finally hit a sermon, and I thought, I'm working it in there. So I boldly proclaimed that the only commandment I know that I definitely have not broken, I have never eaten a bearded vulture, ever. I've not done it, right? Feel really good and confident that I never will either. That I know of, right. Now, that takes me to Ethiopia when we were over there, and someone would say, what is this meat? And the answer was brown. The little owl, the cormorant, the short-eared owl, the barn owl, the tawny owl, the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron of any kind, the hooplo, and the bat. So stop eating bats. All the winged insects that go on all fours are detestable to you, yet, here's an out, yet among the winged insects that go on all fours, you may eat those that have joint legs above their feet with which to hop on the ground. So have at it at grasshoppers, crickets, and locusts. You can eat as much as you want, so go for it. Yeah. Of them you may eat the locust of any kind, the bald locust or any kind, the cricket of any kind, the grasshopper of any kind, but all other winged insects that have 4 feet are detestable to you. And when it says 4 feet, it counts the 6-footed insects as well. I don't know why they just say 4. And these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches their carcass shall be unclean until the evening. Whoever carries any part of their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. So it's not just consuming these, but if you touch these, you are unclean. Every animal that parts a hoof, not cloven-footed, does not chew the cud. This is the later Leviticus, so you're hearing some duplication of what you heard back in chapter 7. Chew the cuds unclean to you. Everyone who touches them shall be unclean. All that walk on their paws among the animals that go on all fours are unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcass shall be unclean till evening. So if you catch that mountain lion, you can't eat him, all right? He's got paws. He shall carry their carcass, shall wash his clothes, be unclean until evening. They are unclean to you. And these are unclean to you among the swarming things that swarm on the ground, the mole rat, the mouse, the great lizard of any kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. So you got to leave Geico's gecko alone. These are unclean to you that swarm. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. Again, it's not just consuming them, it's touching them that make you unclean. I'm getting to a point here. And anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it's an article of wood, a garment of skin, or a sack. Any article that's used for any purpose must be put into the water, shall be unclean. In the evening it shall be clean. So if you have a mouse that falls into your pot is unclean. And you're going, no argument there, right? So, yeah. And if any of them falls into any earthen vessel that shall be unclean, you shall break it. So you don't just take it out and stick it in the dishwasher, you throw it away. You break it, it's over. Any food in it that comes to be eaten, on which the water comes, shall be unclean. All drink that should be drunk from every such vessel shall be unclean. So you don't even drink the water out of there or any other liquid out of there. Everything on which part of their carcasses fall shall be unclean, whether the oven or stove shall be broken to pieces. You throw your oven away. They are unclean and shall remain unclean for you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern holding water shall be clean, but whoever touches a carcass in them shall be unclean. And if any part of their carcass falls upon any seed grain that is to be sown, it is clean. But if water is put on the seed and any part of their carcass falls in it, it's unclean to you. So you can't, the seed is even bad seed. Yeah.
What happens if an animal, a wild animal, falls in the cistern and drowns? Whose job is it to get it out of there?
A Gentile. No, I'm joking. That's tough, yeah. I don't have an answer for you, so I'm just going to move on. Yeah. If any animal which you may eat dies, whoever touches its carcass shall be unclean till the evening. Whoever eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes, be unclean until the evening. Whoever carries the carcass shall wash his clothes, be unclean until the evening. Every swarming thing that swarms on the ground is detestable, shall not be eaten. Whatever goes on its belly and whatever goes on all fours or whatever has many feet and swarming things, so you can't eat centipedes. Out that swarms on the ground you shall not eat, they're detestable. You shall not make yourselves detestable with any swarming thing that swarms. You shall not defile yourselves with them and become unclean through them. For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourselves with any swarming thing that crawls on the ground. For I, the Lord, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God, you shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. So this issue is one of holiness, being set apart. That's literally what holiness means, being set apart, being unique. So when we think of clean or unclean, we tend to either do two things. We either think of hygiene or we think of morality. And neither one of those has anything to do with holiness. It's a Hebrew concept it's almost outside of our ability to grab a hold of it, okay? This is the law about beast and bird and every living creature that moves through the waters, every creature that swarms on the ground, to make a distinction between the clean or the unclean and the clean, and between the living creature that they may be eaten and the living creature that may not be eaten. So some things that we got to lift up as we're moving into this next section. If you eat unclean animals, you're either unclean for a period of time, like till the evening, or you're thrown out of the community, removed from the community. I mean, it's serious stuff. It's connected to the holiness of the Lord. So, and it's a holiness of being set apart. You are a unique people. There's something different about you, and these dietary codes are a reflection of that, okay? Now, a lot of people, they like to make some kind of health connections between the dietary codes. And I think there are certain cases where you can make a case and go, yeah, that makes sense from what we know of modern nutritional value and all that type of stuff. But there's others that you're just left, I don't know why you can't eat bearded vultures. I mean, they're a bird, they're kind of a turkey type thing, right? And so modern day arguments break down because we're trying to force our understanding on something that is designated holy by the Lord, period. Yeah, you in the back. Yeah, in Judaism, the question is, if I get the question right, why do Jews adhere to the dietary codes, and does it seem like they're doing it more after a certain 20s and 30s? You said Judaism is different. Well, it's somewhat different than Christianity in that it's not just a religion, but it is an identity as a people. Christianity is really more about faith and your relationship with Christ and your understanding of who He is as Savior. You might be a Christian just because your parents were a Christian, but Christianity is really more about that faith relationship with God. In Judaism, a lot of times Jews are very comfortable with having secular Jews in their midst who have Jewish identity and carry a lot of the festivals and things like that, but don't necessarily go to synagogue or not real active, and they might not even believe in God, but they still consider themselves Jewish. For me, it'd be real hard-pressed to have somebody say, well, I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in God. I would really be left scratching my head going, I don't understand. But in Judaism, I think that is something that would be true. I could be totally wrong, and if someone from the Jewish background sees this, correct me big time. But it's just kind of what I've observed. So adhering to dietary codes, you'll find that in Judaism, people are all over the board, just like you have people all over the board in Christianity. Going from someone from a liberal, and I'm saying liberal from a theological standpoint, not political, but a liberal theological view all the way to ultra-Orthodox, you're going to find a wide chasm in the practice of dietary codes, but they're all going to call themselves Jews in the midst of that. That answers your question. Okay. So, yeah, they can kind of choose what they want to do and how they want to carry that out. So, I tell you, the stuff I go for you guys just kind of amazes me sometimes. I found a person who wrote their PhD thesis on Babylonian food cultures in ancient Babylon. And I read the thesis for you guys and excised pieces, just so we have a lens of what Daniel found himself in, okay? Which I think is really important, because this to me explains why Daniel is like, I got a problem here, okay? So, and I didn't put the whole thesis up here, okay? So you don't have to read the whole PhD. I just pulled out the germane pieces. So, this is by Elizabeth Rosemary Ellison back in 1978 at the University of London, Faculty of Arts, for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, and her PhD is called A Study of Diet in Mesopotamia, 3000 to 600 BC. 605 BC is Daniel, right? And associated agricultural techniques and method of food preparation. I didn't do the agriculture and food preparation. I just got some of the dietary stuff. So here we go. The pig is not an animal likely to be kept for any other purpose but for food. So it's reasonable to assume that where it was kept, there it was eaten. Archaeological representations of the pig occur in Jemdet, Nasser period at Rafjai, where a large pig is shown beside preparations for a banquet, painted on a scarlet ware vessel at Tel Barak as an amulet. So here's an artifact from that time period that says, when we had banquets, pigs were there. And no, they weren't eating, they were being eaten. In the Agade period, I have no idea what period that is, a cylinder seal shows wild pigs being hunted. 3 men are standing in a boat. One is propelling the boat with a pole. The middle figure is a deity, while the third figure is spearing a boar in the reeds. All this suggests the pig was kept as a food animal. This animal was kept for the king's hunting pleasure. Hunting of the wild pig may have been carried out for sport, for food, or to rid the area of destructive pests. Number of proverbs and popular sayings which are derogatory to the pig. This is funny, I think. The pig is said to have no sense, to be unholy in the eyes of the Babylonians, and smelly. Well, I got that one right. To be unfit for a temple, not allowed to tread on pavement, to be abomination to all the gods, and accursed by Samos. Samos was, I think, the sun god of Babylon, something like that. These unflattering remarks mainly come from an Assyrian tablet dated the 6th year of Sargon II and suggest that although the pig was not considered fit for offering to the gods, still eaten. Everybody likes bacon, right? One saying states, his master left him, the butcher slaughters him, right? So Babylonians like, they are just detestable, horrible, awful beasts. Yeah, let's eat it. It sounds great, right? So, and we would go, yep, sounds right, yep. We don't like having hog yards around us, but good piece of bacon on Sunday morning, right? That's pretty good. Meat with fat is good. So remember, the Jews said, don't eat the fat. Stay away from the fat. Meat with fat is good. I'd go, yeah, not good, but good, right? And meat with suet is good. What shall we give to the slave girl to eat? Well, let her eat the ham of the pigs. In other words, meat from the pig was suitable for the slave girl to eat, while other pieces of meat were considered too good. So you'd give her the raw cuts, but keep the better cuts for yourself, right? Bones from sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs were found at Tel Amar, examined by Professor Hilsheimer. He estimated that bones represented about 14 to 16 individual pigs, 6 sheep, goat, cattle, 10 gazelle, 3 fallow deer, and 5 onger. I have no idea what that is. Probably I don't know what it is. Which suggests that the pig was the most important food animal, so they ate a lot of pork in Babylon. Luann's looking up what an onger is, so you got the spelling down? All right. Provision of meat was probably the main reason for hunting. Main animals hunted were ibex, wild goat, gazelle, members of the deer family, and they ate rabbits in Babylon. Okay, all right, here's Daniel having another problem. Methods of hunting will be mentioned in the discussion of the various animals. The hare is a common feature on cylinder seals, frequently used as a filler motif. Particularly nice example of a hare being carried by a hunter who also carries a gazelle across his shoulder. From a wood appears on a Neo-Assyrian relief from the palace of Sargon II at Khorsabad. So he was after gazelle and happened to see a rabbit and shot the rabbit too. Most famous representation of the locust is on Assyrian relief in the southwest palace of Sennacherib at Nineveh, where locusts fastened on a stick are carried together with fruit, game, birds, flowers as a part of the provisions for a feast. It was suggested that locusts were considered a delicacy. Crunch, crunch, No, thank you. Tastes like chicken, is that what you said? Cannolis, oh yeah. She's not a cannoli fan, and I love cannolis, yeah. Yep.
How did John the Baptist then eat locusts?
It's permissible.
Oh, I thought it wasn't.
No, they can eat locusts. That's why I put that one in green. So Daniel could eat the locusts. And he could eat all he wants, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not interested. But yeah, locusts are permissible, as long as they got the joint leg. So crickets and grasshoppers and locusts, you can eat all those you want. But you can't eat a bee or an ant or anything like that. Mastemblius hapentius, a spiny eel, which can reach a length of 50 centimeters, about 20 inches. It has minute scales and dorsal and anal fins, which are semi-continuous with a caudal tail fin. So I put it in yellow. Does it work? It's kind of got scales, but not really, so probably not. It's found in the Tigris, Euphrates, and in lakes. It's good as food, probably this type of eel, which is usually depicted without scales on the Neo-Assyrian reliefs. I don't know if you've seen Indiana Jones and the Last Ark, or it was Temple of Doom. They're at a banquet and they open something up and all these eels come out and all over it, so might be that eel right there, I don't know. So that's what they've been eating in Babylon. So they're eating food that clearly is not the type of food that Daniel should eat. Okay, so he's already going, okay, you're eating some stuff that I shouldn't eat, okay? But they're also eating foods that he could eat in regard to meats. They do sheep, they do cattle, right? And so Daniel could do that, but he's saying, no, I'm not gonna eat any of that. We're gonna get to the verse where he says, I'm just gonna eat vegetables. So you might go, well, if they're eating meat that you could eat, why don't you eat the meat that you could eat, and why are you sticking with the vegetables? Here's more. I told you this is a big rabbit hole, which they can't eat, by the way. So this is from the Jewish Virtual Library. And this is more contemporary use of dietary codes, but it has its roots back. And what I'm going to focus on more here is not the foods, but the preparation. And it's the preparation that I think is going to tell us why Daniel was like, I'm good, I'll just stick to vegetable. I mean, he doesn't even eat locusts, okay? So kashrut is the body of Jewish law dealing with what foods can and cannot be eaten and how those foods must be prepared. The word kashrut comes from the Hebrew meaning of fit, proper, or correct. The word kosher, which we're more familiar with, which describes food that meets the standards of kashrut, is often used to describe ritual objects that are made in accordance with the Jewish law and are fit for ritual use. Food that is not kosher is referred to as tarif, which literally means torn. It's not good. It's ripped apart. So one of the questions that non-Jewish people thinking about this topic go, how in the world could you figure all this out? Well, they make it very simple. There are letters placed on food items in the grocery store, either a P, a K, or a Q, I believe are the three letters. And so if you look for those letters on items, and it has one of those letters, you automatically know this is kosher. I can go ahead. So you don't have to sit there reading the ingredients and figure out how it's prepared. They do all that. So they have preparation notifications, markings on all food. So you can go up to Baker's and sit there and look at a can of peas and see if you don't see a marking, not kosher. You're all not believing me, so I can see, you're all gonna go, yeah, she says it's true. Oh, there was a guy, yeah.
Fairbury hot dogs from Fairbury, Nebraska, and Oscar Mayer hot dogs used to be kosher.
Ah.
I don't know if they still are, but.
I bet Hebrew National might be kosher, just taking a stab there. Right.
So is it blessed by a rabbi? Is that what makes it kosher?
It's how it's prepared. What
What does the rabbi have to do? He has to be there to oversee.
he's got to oversee the process, right?
So the rabbi's there.
Yep. Gets the certification, right? What? No, they're beef. I'm not a betting man, but I'd almost lay money down on that. If they're pork, they're really misnamed. So yeah. Kosher. Oh, now she's checking.
We have a Jewish nephew.
Yeah.
We have a Jewish nephew in Denver, and they just opened a kosher pizza.
Hebrew National Certified Kosher by. Yeah. Beef? Got to be beef, yep. Kosher is not a style of cooking, so you can have a kosher pizza parlor. Therefore, there's no such thing as kosher style of food. We tend to think of Jewish food, and that's the kosher food. That's not it at all. Any kind of food, Chinese, Mexican, Indian, etc., can all be kosher if it's prepared in accordance with Jewish law. I think the same probably is true of halal, the same understanding in Islam. At the same time, traditional Jewish foods like knishes, bagels, bintzes, and matzah ball soup can all be tarif. They can be torn if not prepared in accordance with Jewish law. So you can have Jewish food and you prepare it wrong and it's not kosher. So just because it's a Jewish cuisine doesn't mean it's kosher. Many modern Jews think that the laws of kashrut are simply primitive health regulations that have become obsolete with modern methods of food preparation. There is no question that some of the dietary laws have beneficial health effects. For example, the laws regarding kosher slaughter are so sanitary that kosher butchers and slaughterhouses often are exempt from USDA regulations. They go so far above USDA regulations, they don't even bother giving them. However, health is not the main reason for Jewish dietary laws. And in fact, many of the laws of kashrut have no known connection with health. To the best of our modern scientific knowledge, there's no reason why camel or rabbit meat, both tarif, is any less healthy than cow or goat meat. They're just declared unclean. Has nothing to do with health. It's from a Jewish site, by the way. The short answer as to why Jews observe these laws is because the Torah says so. Period. That's it. Torah does not specify a reason for these laws, but for an observant Jew, there's no need for a reason. Jews show their belief and obedience to God by following the laws, even though they do not know the specific reason. So, why don't we eat rabbit? Because God said, don't eat rabbit. So we all go, well, why are we eating rabbit? You got to go to the New Testament and a conversation Jesus had with some Pharisees and then also the early church. In the book, To Be a Jew, Rabbi Hyman Havale Donin suggests the kashrut laws are designated as a call to holiness, being set apart. The ability to distinguish between right and wrong, good and evil, pure and defiled, the sacred and the profane is very important in Judaism, so that's where Daniel found himself. Yeah.
I realize we were talking about the laws in Leviticus, but I think it was in either Ezekiel or Jeremiah where God said, it says eat, and it was something that was unclean. So, Lord, I can't eat anything unclean. And God says to do it anyway. Likewise with Peter in the New Testament,
Right.
when Jesus himself says,
With
doesn't matter because what goes in is going to come out, basically.
right. Yep.
How do we get from point A to point B?
We are set apart as Christians by the cross of Christ. Not circumcision, not dietary codes, none of that stuff. Yeah.
The reason that, some of these sound silly, but the reason they stay specifically on this right path is the reason that they survived Babylon. It's the reason that they survived exile. It's the reason that they come together, the Holocaust, they come together. Sometimes they don't know why they're doing certain things, but it holds them together through centuries.
Sets them apart as
It
a
sets them
unique
apart.
people. Yep, exactly.
And it's not a culture, it's not a religion, it's a culture.
It's religion woven into the culture, yeah. Imposing rules on what you can and cannot eat ingrains that kind of self-control, kind of like what Patrick was talking about. In addition, it elevates a simple act of eating into a religious ritual. The Jewish dinner table is often compared to the temple altar in rabbinic literature. I think the closest thing we as Gentiles do is Thanksgiving. We eat very different food than what we eat the rest of the, but it's food that almost carries a symbolic nature to it and reminds us of past events, or should remind us, or something. It's a weak example, but it's probably the closest. Keeping kosher is not particularly difficult in itself. What makes keeping kosher difficult is the fact that the rest of the world does not do so. That's where Daniel found himself. in a culture that was like, I don't understand what you're even talking about. The basic underlying rules are fairly simple. If you buy your meat at a kosher butcher, buy only kosher certified products at the market. That's the letters I was telling you about. The only thing you need to think about is the separation of meat and dairy. Just got to keep your milk away from your meat. And I think of kind of the Babylonian, Assyrian area, and I think of all the curry dishes that have yogurt and meats. And I just got to think they were doing that all the way back then too. So Daniel might have been going, oh, you're mixing dairy and, right. I really like it though, it tastes pretty tasty. Keeping kosher only becomes difficult when you try to eat in a non-kosher restaurant or at the home of a person who doesn't keep kosher. In those situations, your lack of knowledge about your host's ingredients and the food preparation techniques make it very difficult to keep kosher. So we have eaten many meals at our Muslim friends' home. They have never been to our house. Probably because they're like, you might think you know what you're doing, but we're not sure we trust you in food preparation. Plus, she's a really good cook, so there's that too. So there's part of me that's thinking Daniel might be going, you Babylonians, you ripped me out of my home, but you put me in the royal palace, so that's pretty cool. And you might think you know what you're doing as far as food preparation, but you probably don't. And when I'm eating, I might not know if I'm eating the correct thing prepared in the correct way or not. Plus, you got these curry dishes that it's contrary. Some commentators have pointed out, however, this may well have been a part of what God had in mind to make it more difficult for us to socialize with those who do not share our religion. Though the details of kashrut are extensive, the laws all derive from very few simple, straightforward rules. Yes?
Is that why, when you go back and look in history, is that why, when you look at the 30s, why Jews were very adamant and very hurt and very felt betrayed because people just kicked the kosher clause to the floor and among everything else?
I think you're touching on something. I know what you're trying to get to. You're pressing toward Nazi Germany.
Yes, but when it said on the last slide, how it felt very uncomfortable, very hard to.
A part of the kosher laws has to do with the notion of being set apart.
Yes.
Being different than everyone else. And when a culture focuses upon being different than everyone else, a lot of times the culture, I don't care what culture it is, usually rise up and reacts negatively to those who stand out as being different. So that is a part of the persecution that the Jews have. I mean, there's probably more to it than that, but that happens not with just Jews, that happens with just about any group of people that identify themselves as being different than other people.
Do Catholics get persecuted for their...
Do who?
Do the Catholics get persecuted for their
In certain
Lents?
In certain places they would, yeah.
That's so weird. Interesting.
That's tying into human nature, I think. Yeah.
What kind of food did they give you when you went there?
Type of food when we were in Jordan? Our Muslim friends. We had a lot of chicken, lamb, which my wife, when she discovered it was lamb, suddenly I found the lamb on my plate because she just intellectually does not do lamb. Potatoes, a lot of vegetables, salads, baklava to die for. I mean, yeah. So that was kind of, I mean, it was all Afghani food, but it was really, really tasty. Certain animals may not be eaten at all. The restriction includes flesh, organs, eggs, milk of the forbidden animals. The animals may be eaten. The birds, mammals must be killed in accordance with Jewish law. All blood must be drained from the meat, boiled out of it before it's eaten. We've already talked about a lot of that. Certain parts of permitted animals may not be eaten. Meat, the flesh of birds, mammals cannot be eaten with dairy. We've talked about that separation. Fish, eggs, fruits, vegetables, and grains can be eaten with either meat or dairy. So that's kind of what he said, I'll eat vegetables, because you can't mess up vegetables, all right? According to some views, fish may be not eaten with meat. So even within Judaism, the rabbis are divided when you get down to the nitty-gritty of some of the dietary codes. Utensils that have come into contact with meat may not be used with dairy and vice versa. Utensils that come in contact with non-kosher food may not be used with kosher food. This applies not only where the contact occurred while the food was hot. Grape products made by non-Jews may not be eaten, so even the wine. So if you notice, Daniel says, I'm not going to eat your meat or drink your wine, because who knows how you prepared your wine. Ritual slaughter is known as shakikak, and the person who performs the slaughter is called a shochet. That's a name for a rabbi. That's the rabbi's full-time job, is slaughtering. That's their job. Yeah.
Are there kosher wine?
Kosher wine, absolutely.
Oh,
What's it called? Mashevitz? Yeah, Manischewitz, yep.
never knew that.
Both Hebrew root shin chet tav, meaning to destroy or kill. The method of slaughter is quick, deep stroke across the throat with a perfectly sharp blade with no nicks or unevenness. If you nick, it's not a kosher kill, and the animal is removed. Method's painless, causes unconsciousness within 2 seconds, widely recognized as the most humane method of slaughter possible. Another advantage of shiktak is ensures rapid, complete draining of the blood, which is also necessary to render the meat kosher. Shochet is not merely a butcher. He's a pious man, well-trained in Jewish law, usually a rabbi, particularly as it relates to kashrut in smaller, more remote communities. The rabbi and the shochet were often the same person. The Torah prohibits the consumption of blood. We talked about that. Certain kinds of fat are not allowed. Some fats are, some others aren't. Even the smallest quantity, I got so many slides, good grief. Smallest quantity of dairy or meat, something renders it entirely dairy for purposes of kashrut. For example, most margarines are dairy for kosher purposes because they contain a small quantity of whey or other dairy products to give it a dairy-like taste. Animal fat is considered meat for purposes of kashrut. If you therefore use the same saucepan to heat up some warm milk, the fleshling status of the pan is transmitted to the milk. In other words, what the pan is identified as. And the milking status of the milk is transmuted to the pan, making both the pan and the milk a forbidden mixture, because you used the pan for something else and then you put milk. Yeah. Kosher status can be transmitted from food to the utensil or from the utensil to the food only in the presence of heat. Thus, if you are eating cold food in a non-kosher establishment, the condition of plates is not an issue. He says, I'm just going to eat vegetables. We're not cooking anything, and I'm not drinking your wine. So he basically, Daniel is saying, I'm going to eat food that you supply, but I'm making sure that nothing gets messed up here as far as kosher. Yeah.
So he's eating raw vegetables.
Raw vegetables, evidently, not eating cooked vegetables. If you use the same knife to slice cold cuts and cheese, as long as you clean it in between, not really recommended procedure because it increases the likelihood of mistakes. Stovetops and sinks routinely become non-kosher utensils because they routinely come in contact with both meat and dairy in the process of heat. It's necessary, therefore, to use dish pans when cleaning dishes. Don't soak them directly in the sink, and to use separate spoon rests and trivets when putting things down on the stovetop because you don't want to make the stovetop unclean. You should use separate towels, pot holders for meat and dairy. Routine laundering kashers such items. You can simply launder them between using them for meat and dairy. See how incredibly complicated this is? The restrictions on grape products derive from the laws against products of idolatry. Wine was commonly used in the rituals of all ancient religions. The wine was routinely sanctified for pagan purposes while it was being processed. For this reason, use of wines and other grape products made by non-Jews was prohibited. They didn't want anything being dedicated to any deity. For the most part, this rule only affects wine and grape juice. It becomes a concern with many fruit drinks, fruit-flavored drinks, which are often sweetened with grape juice. You may also notice that it's virtually impossible to find a kosher baking powder because baking powder is made with cream of tartar, a byproduct of wine making. Now I'm closing up the rabbit hole. We're done for the night. We got through a verse.
That animal is a wild ass, but it is more horse-like than the African ass.
So don't eat any donkeys either, all right?
It looks like a horse, but it kind of has a donkey face to it.
Almost mule-like then in some ways, yeah.
I got one last question.
Yep.
Vegetables were dedicated to pagan gods too. How did he know these vegetables hadn't been dedicated?
I have no idea.
I don't know.
Poor guy had to eat something, you know. Vegetables probably the safest. Usually, oftentimes would be a grain offering more than a vegetable type thing, so that could be it. Yeah. Hand him the mic, please. Yep.
During the COVID, I noticed
Don't think you're on.
COVID, I noticed that some of the Jewish people did not take the vaccine because it was of religion, because of the blood, all what you're talking about was
Interesting.
in the vaccines.
Interesting.
And so I don't know if you, yeah.
I know nothing about
Yeah.
that, but
Well, it's pretty big.
that's fascinating.
And they were exempt, and they were using the religious exemption for not taking
Interesting.
these vaccines. Anyway. I'm Jewish. I'm kidding. I'm teasing.
Yeah, the
Nobody can do all of this.
Orthodox Jews do.
Really?
Yep.
All of it?
Yep. And it really, I mean, for us, we got this all dumped on us tonight, and it's like, psh, you know, how could, but you grow up doing this, and it's just the natural thing that you do, so you almost aren't even thinking about it as you're doing it. And, you know, the sensitivity that they have that we don't have as far as dietary stuff. I mean, we've got people in our family that are gluten intolerant, you know, and so when we prepare a meal, we try to prepare two separate ones. And so I've been learning how to make gluten-free pie crusts and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes they're just as good as the other pie crust, you know, so, but you know, really having that sensitivity. And there's a lot of times, you know, I'll prepare a meal and then they'll go, so-and-so's gonna be there. So now I gotta, you know, quick scramble and make something else. And so that's probably the closest thing, but it's certainly, you know, and even with communion, we have people that are intolerant to gluten, and so we have gluten-free wafers. And so I try to have those, you know, ready at hand and stuff like that. So, I mean, but that's for a different reason. It's for a health reason than the other, so. But, yeah. Yes.
I, 9 times out of 10, don't notice the difference between gluten and non-gluten. Unless it's labeled, I don't know.
Right. There's other times that I've tasted stuff, you know, that I've used like an almond flour, and it's like, oh, yeah, I couldn't eat this, you know, so. It is what it is. So Laura was joining us and said, very interesting topics tonight. That's been great listening to. Well, good. I'm glad you could hear it all. All right. We've gone over time, but that's okay. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we we're mystified and confused somewhat by the whole notion of clean and unclean, but it just fundamentally rests upon what you say. And we pray that in the midst of our faithful journey that we would have such faith and obedience to you as well. We pray, Heavenly Father, that our focus would be upon the redeeming nature of Jesus Christ, and that we would not allow our religiosity to get in the way of having that deep faith relationship with him. We pray all this in the holy and precious name of Christ our Lord and Savior. Amen.